Meet Naomi, a successful black businesswoman who excelled in curating skincare products for diverse skin types. This great work had won her the Business Person of the Year award in the city. With this, her company's success enjoyed more profits that came with more productions. With her achievement, Naomi felt a sense of pride and fulfillment. She had worked tirelessly to create products that catered to various skin types, making her brand inclusive and innovative. Naomi was currently at work. Her hands were shaky and her body tired. She hadn't eaten breakfast, leaving her in a crappy mood. That was because of the important client she had to deal with. The meeting with the investor had ended later than expected, but the outcome was a closed deal, making her happy. Naomi hurriedly made her way to her office to get her bag and grab lunch. She needed to recharge. Naomi's daily life was a hectic one, a constant juggling act between work and family responsibilities. But it was about to get even more complicated. With a heavy sigh of tiredness, she made her way to the restaurant, her mind already shifting to the next task on her list. Lately, though, her thoughts had been consumed by a different kind of exhaustion, the emotional toll of living with her parents. It was time to leave to escape the suffocating atmosphere that had become unbearable thanks to their 60-year-old tenant, Mr. Phillip, and his constant nosy and sexist comments. Naomi's struggles. Naomi's eyes had flashed with annoyance as Mr. Phillip's words still lingered, echoing in her mind. Earlier that week, he had suggested, get a guy to run your business. His condescending tone had stung, but she had held back her response, not wanting to create a scene in front of her parents. Instead, she had gritted her teeth and forced out a strained thank you with frustrated feelings. Naomi knew her parents appreciated Mr. Phillip's company, and she didn't want to upset them. His words stung, and she couldn't shake off the feeling of being belittled. Hungry Naomi had gotten to the restaurant ready to fit her rumbling stomach. As usual, all eyes were on Naomi. She was used to the stares, but they still bothered her. The constant attention made her feel like an outsider. She had no answer to this for a long time. Ignoring, she had ordered her food and found a quiet spot to eat her meal. Curiosity had won over when she tipped a waitress and asked why she always got stares. The reply she had gotten had been concise and straight to the point. You know you were different. You, of course, draw attention. The waitress who had been nice to her had made her aware. The attendant had noticed the sullen look on Naomi and smiled, saying she had shut it down. Naomi appreciated her, but the answer had hurt her beyond explanation. Naomi finished her lunch and paid, excusing the scuff from another waiter as she passed. She would write to the manager about it one day, but Naomi knew it would only make things worse. As she started her car, her phone rang, breaking the silence. It was her grandma, one of the special people in her life. Her grandma had made her believe she could be successful as a young black woman, and Naomi cherished their bond. Naomi's grandma asked if she was doing well and needed saving. Naomi laughed, missing her warmth and guidance. Her excitement peaked when her grandma mentioned visiting for the weekend. Please don't change your mind, Grandma, Naomi begged, her voice filled with anticipation. I won't, dear, her grandma reassured her. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Naomi ended the call, her heart filled with joy. She couldn't wait to spend time with her grandma and share her successes and trails too. Naomi's encounter at the hardware store. Naomi had remembered her father had mentioned needing some items from the hardware store. She needed to visit the hardware store as she was done feeding her stomach. She calls her personal assistant to address the business for the day. Naomi knew there was one hardware store down her house street. Her father had warned her against going there with no reason, but her staff had mentioned it was the biggest one the town had to offer, and with a guarantee that she would get whatever she needed. Naomi had been turned between the two comments. She decided to check the store out with no expectation in mind. Checking her list once parked, she needed to buy the nails and paint her father had asked her to get. She had added some personal needs to the list too. As she entered the store, the attendant at the entrance looked at her weirdly, with an eye roll before saying a faint hello. She had caught his name on his tag. Finn seemed uninterested and unhelpful, leaving Naomi to find the items on her list alone. Naomi felt uncomfortable, but continued shopping. Later, another attendant, who introduced himself as Max, arrived to assist Naomi. He was more helpful and friendly, showing her where the items she needed were located. Naomi appreciated Max's help and continued shopping. Her parents hadn't worked the garden in a long while, and she was sure they needed hardware for that too. Naomi goes ahead to pick up the rake, alongside the lawn and garden supplies. She had gotten a vase to keep her flowers too. As she finished her shopping, Max was nowhere to be found. Naomi noticed the lack of organization and guidance in the store. She let out a heavy sigh, feeling unsettled. Naomi noticed more people had been ushered in to get their items. Not wanting to seem unserious by asking the buyers who just walked in, she approached the attendant instead. Approaching Finn again, Naomi asked for assistance with checkout. Before Finn could respond, a yell startled her, and another attendant rushed in, asking Finn to bring Naomi in. Shocked, Naomi followed him, curious about what was happening. "Were you planning to steal from us?" Mr. George asked, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. Naomi was taken aback. "What? No, I'm just here to shop." Mr. George's tone was condescending. "We can't be too careful with your kind of people. We need to search you." "My kind of people," Naomi replied. "You know what I'm talking about. We need to search you," Mr. George retorted. Naomi had pointed to her cart. "I'm trying to buy stuff, not steal it." The female attendant appeared, ready to search Naomi. "You're not touching me," Naomi said firmly, blocking her. Naomi had refused, letting out a yell, hoping someone had cared, only to see Mr. George announced with a smirk on his face. "Just making sure everything's accurate, folks. Don't mind us." Naomi felt embarrassed and insulted as the staff nodded in agreement and shoppers minded their business. "You won't touch me," she repeated to the female attendant, using her hands to block her body from the attendant, who had already started her search, touching her body for any sign of property. Naomi knew it was a fake cry. What hardware would she pocket in her suit pants or jacket? The discrimination was clear, and Mr. George was on his best smile, since she had seen him while it happened. As the attendant started scanning Naomi's items, Mr. George sneered. "Make sure to scan everything carefully." She claims she came to buy it. Naomi took her phone to call her father, but Mr. George held her wrist, his grip tightening. "Let go," she shouted. Naomi had been strong-willed, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her demeanor had changed. She needed to be out of there. No one would rescue her. "Sir, you'll have to let her go. This is pure harassment and a potential assault if she pushes this through with the authorities." Naomi had heard an unknown voice. She had taken a fast turn to look at who had come to her rescue. It was a white young man. Her face couldn't help but show discontent with his presence. Another white man's presence was not what she needed. "Meet Alex." Alex is a young white man who just left the military as a naval officer. He did excel at his job. He was awarded as one of the honorary officers in the Marine Department, one of his biggest achievements, but he had been met with severe damage to his right leg during one of the expeditions, which had made it harder for him to walk for a while. He had struggled the past year with the big realization that he couldn't go back to the military anymore after the big damage to his leg. After a whole year of therapy to get him out of the depressive state and work on his healing journey, Alex is now better, but is seeking a new passion. With his therapist's recommendation, Alex had moved to his parents' house in town to restart life and discover a new purpose. A late afternoon was different in the town compared to the city where he came from. It was much more quiet and less busy. He had gotten a new house that had come with a garden, which he would love to grow but hadn't been motivated to. After procrastinating for too long, Alex woke up this morning with the decision to go to the big store he had seen downtown to pick up some hardware for his garden. He had fixed his cap to walk his way to the store, which wasn't far from his house. He had heard a scream upon entering the store. He saw a man hold a woman by her wrist trying to snatch her phone. Scanning around, others had looked at the scene and had gone back to their business. Alex intervenes on behalf of Naomi. He had immediately spotted an attendant going through the woman's bag. It was impossible to steal anything in the hardware store. Alex had also cited the surveillance cameras in the store. That should be enough proof for her to be let go or checked. Alex hated harassment, he loved discipline, and if there was anything he would not look past, it was unfair treatment. That was what he had learned and understood. He approached the scene and requested that the man let go of the woman. Alex stated to the man that he could be charged with harassment and assault to relieve the woman of that look of embarrassment written on her face. He could see the traces of sweat now piling on her head. She had turned to look at him, but her face remained just as it was, embarrassed yet unmoved by his intervention. Her eye focus had shifted from him to the man, who now looked at him with a smile. "What would you like to buy?" the man had asked Alex, while pointing to his attendants to keep an eye on the woman. Alex had guessed he was the store owner. He had seen that he had been more respectful and listened to what he had to say. "You could have done the same to her, spoken to her just like you have now." Alex had noticed the woman was done with her call and was now listening to their conversation. "You have surveillance cameras all over your store. I wonder why you are going through the strenuous process to confirm your suspicions." Alex had said that and had noticed a fake smile on the owner's face. He had seen that before. It was someone who had been caught red-handed for their crime. A scoff had occurred. Alex had traced it to the woman, who had looked at himself and the owner with the same look of disgust and an eye roll as she collected her bag from the attendant while she pulled her card to pay. Finished paying, she waited. The anger on her face was clearly seen. She refused to carry her items. She waited. The owner had urged her to leave, but she hadn't even paid him any attention. Alex had approached her to apologize to her, hoping it would make her feel better. His approach had been met with a look of confusion and dismissal on her face. She didn't even speak a word to him. Alex had gotten distracted off her attitude when the police arrived. Who had called the police was no question, as a sigh of relief had burst out of the woman. Things go sour. "Are you Miss Naomi?" "I'm Officer Johnson," one of the policemen had asked her, confirming if she had been the one to make the call. She had confirmed, explaining how she had arrived at the store to get some supplies. She had met with the attendant's negative attitudes, which she ignored as she had become used to them. She had wanted to pay, but no attendant was available inside. She had also approached the door to ask the attendant when the owner, Mr. George, called her back in to harass and assault her, also using racist slurs. Alex had seen just the reason for her attitude toward him. The police had asked to see the surveillance camera's clips, which had drained the color out of Mr. George's face. Alex had watched everything unfold as the police called Mr. George to follow them for questioning. Alex had concluded that that was the end of his shopping experience, which ended before it started, until the woman, Naomi, pointed to him. "Sir, you'll have to follow us too for questioning. You are a witness and a possible offender." Miss Naomi had also mentioned the possibility that you might be an ally with Mr. George. Miss Naomi said your words might have been a means to save him from her anger. The policeman who had walked up to him had said. Alex couldn't believe his ears. It didn't make sense to him. He had approached Naomi, hoping to get an explanation for why he was being questioned, not only as a witness, but as an offender. He had received a big shock when Naomi referred to him as a white man just like Mr. George, who believes in making blacks feel less of themselves. Alex's look of confusion had been written all over his face as he looked between Naomi and Mr. George. All he did was save her from getting assaulted and harassed. A thank you wasn't muttered, but he had done it because he wanted to. He was trained to respect people, and Mr. George did just the opposite. She had also spoken loudly, which had also triggered him to help her out. He had no idea how this had turned into a question about being an ally for him. Alex knew he had no choice but to follow the police, so he took out his phone to inform his childhood best friend, not wanting to bother his parents. Naomi had been surprised that someone had come to her rescue. She had appreciated that her wrist got relief from the tight hold of Mr. George, whose behavior had been nothing more than an indication of hate. She wanted to say thank you, but the man's word, insinuating she might have done what she had been accused of, had turned her off being appreciative. Naomi couldn't believe her ears. He also thought she was a thief, but just wanted her to be dealt with by the law. Naomi knew her anxiety must have kicked in with her understanding of the man's actions, but he was a white man. She had never received good gestures from them. It had been more of a reproach from her competitors to clients and even her previous coworkers. She had always been a conversation of ridicule. Either he was guilty or not, the law would decide, but now Naomi would ensure that her faith was in herself and not in anyone who was white. She moved her items, which she had paid for, to her car, bitter about even walking into the store in the first place after being warned, as she follows the policeman to the station. Alex had so many thoughts running through his mind while seated in the police car. He knew he was not guilty, but he couldn't wear out the fact that Naomi had reacted in such a manner. Was her reproach for white men that big, or had the situation just triggered that action? Alex wondered if his treatment had been due to her last experience with one of his kind. He could understand, but not at the expense of reporting to the police with the description she had made. He hoped the situation got sorted out. He didn't want to spend a night in the police station for an offense he didn't commit. They were finally at the police station. Everyone was asked to put in their statements. Alex does just that, sliding a quick look at Naomi, hoping she lets the law work and is being truthful. Naomi and Alex at the police station. Naomi is now at the police station to write her statement about what had happened at the store. She hoped that she got justification for her situation. She had written everything that had happened in detail, ensuring she had included no lies or assumptions in her statement. Naomi didn't want to be like the people who hurt her with their discrimination. She also didn't want their words to be right, hence she wrote exactly how it happened. Naomi was called in for questioning as the case reporter. She was greeted by Officer Johnson, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a professional demeanor. He introduced himself and began asking questions about the incident at the hardware store. Naomi appreciated his neutral tone and great listening. She narrates the event just as it had happened, asking him to do his job of helping her get justice for it. Naomi had watched as Mr. George was questioned and asked to wait. It was Alex's turn. She watched the young man who had saved her from Mr. George's hand answer the question with no intentions behind them. Naomi felt guilty but had resisted it as she wiped her sweaty palms around her clothes. A burst through the station were her parents, whom she had called once she reached the police station. Her mother had rushed to the seat where Alex was being questioned by police and dragged him by his shirt, screaming and asking why he had done that to her. Naomi had jumped into the scene, telling her mom that he wasn't the culprit but Mr. George, who was at the other end with the second policeman. Her father's eye had connected with Naomi after her mom was settled, exactly what she expected from her father. He had warned her not to go to the store, but she had refused. Naomi knows her father well. His reason must have been very valid. Naomi had taken them to a seat to give the police a chance to conclude the questioning. Naomi couldn't help but flash back to the horror in Alex's eyes when her mother had grabbed him. She felt sorry. His look had reminded her of the remarks she gets to hear every day when she goes out. It reminded her of how much pain she bore inside. The comments had torn her into pieces, with so many insecurities she had found difficult to share. She didn't want that for anyone, but she had to do this for her first fight against the discrimination she had always faced and has faced today. If Alex was guilt-free, she was sure he would be released. Alex's eyes had gone wild the moment the collar of his shirt was grabbed unexpectedly. It was by a woman. He couldn't count the number of curse words that had been said, but she had been so angry. Her words had made him connect the dots. She was Naomi's mother. Officer Johnson and Naomi had stepped in to get him released. Naomi had informed her mother that it wasn't him who did that, but Mr. George instead. She had even mentioned him saving her, which was met by a confused yet unwelcoming look from Naomi's mother toward him. She had left him for Officer Johnson to continue his questioning. Naomi had noticed how respectful and focused Officer Johnson was in regards to the case. She trusted him to carry out his duties. Alex had answered every question he had been asked. Questions about his involvement were asked. He also requested they checked the footage that exempted him from being a threat to Naomi. Officer Johnson had done just that. Alex noticed how Officer Johnson's eyes narrowed slightly as he reviewed the surveillance footage. "I see," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "Mr. George's behavior was unacceptable. I'll make sure to take this seriously." Just in time, his best friend, Lebron, had made it there. The police had asked him to wait as Alex got cleared. Alex was told to make himself available if he would be needed as a witness. Alex had agreed while he found his way to the seating area outside the station. They reconcile. "Hey, I'm so sorry about what happened," Naomi said, approaching Alex. "It's fine, I'm just glad I'm out of there," Alex replied, still confused. "But why did you involve me in your situation with Mr. George? I don't understand why you did that." Naomi had hesitated, not responding. "Look, I want to thank you for helping me," she said instead. "Can I get your number? I want to compensate you for your trouble." Alex felt insulted. "No, that's not necessary. I don't want your money." He turned to leave, but his friend Logan stayed behind. "Hey, I'll give you his number," Logan said to Naomi. "He's a good guy, but he's a little stubborn sometimes." Alex had overheard Logan say to her. He had noticed her smile and ease with Logan. Alex couldn't help but wonder, what made him different from Logan, and why was Naomi more comfortable with Logan than himself? Logan had returned, and they had made their way back home together. Alex knew it wasn't going to be the smoothest of nights for him, with what he had experienced. Alex was confused, but he understood that if it were to happen again, he would repeat the same, but his color and race had denied him the opportunity to be a good guy in the eyes of the black woman. Naomi had gotten Alex's number. She needed to speak to him. Naomi had been rude to him today, but it wasn't her fault, but rather the culprit who had shown what he was capable of. Naomi approached Officer Johnson's desk to get the final report, which had indicated that Mr. George would be taken in for further questioning since his statement, along with those of Alex and hers, did not align. He promised her to investigate the matter, and he reassured her that justice would prevail. Trusting his words, she hoped the police would do their job and Mr. George gets punished for his action. Alex's and Naomi's individual reflection. Home from the police station, Alex realized he was a tiny bit close to getting punished for a crime he didn't commit the previous day. He knew explaining to anyone what had happened to him would sound unbelievable. It was a treatment that seemed impossible as a reward for doing good. Alex's motivation to save Naomi had steered from a deep sense of empathy and responsibility. Having experienced his own struggles with depression and feeling lost after leaving the military, his sense of purpose and duty from his military background, honed during his time in the military, had driven him to protect Naomi from harm from Mr. George. It was an act he would perform over and over again. Alex knew he was white. He couldn't wash himself off the guilt that he hadn't seen what Mr. George had done in person before. His parents, although much educated on it now, had done that once before he went to Marine school, passing microaggressions to a black neighbor they once had. Naomi could be right about putting him in the box based on her experiences, but that she shouldn't have placed him in it with the event that had happened. He wasn't like them. He had learned to be inclusive in the military. He worked with people from different races because they had one common goal. He had no idea that it was difficult for a town like this. Alex, tired, switched off the light, retiring to bed with thoughts of the dynamics of his life changing. Naomi had gotten home from the police station alongside her parents. Her parents had been mute with no attempt to say anything. Naomi knew it was because of one thing: her parents were scared. They were scared she had reported to the police and was fighting for justice. Her parents believed in conforming, but she was different. Naomi expected that Mr. George might be granted bail. He was a smart man. He would scheme to get his way out, but a tiny bit of her hoped he got punished for his actions. He had blossomed the insecurities she had as a black woman. Naomi was losing her courage. She knew she would start detaching and avoiding places as much as she could to put a stop to these comments that affected her. Naomi had paid her dues to grow up well. She had made sacrifices for her to be subjected to this treatment. Maybe she needed to fight against the treatment. Her mother had interrupted her brooding process by giving her food which she had forcefully eaten. Naomi's father had shown up, giving her a hug. He mentioned his warnings for her not to go, and he explained the reason. Mr. George had once been suspected of creating a hate group for the purpose of dealing with blacks. He had found out some years ago when he had gone there to get some things for the doghouse. Naomi's father had been treated poorly, but had no choice but to get what he wanted, knowing fully well he had no option. He had paid for the goods and left. Her father had returned after forgetting to add something to his list, only to have overheard Mr. George discussing how much he hated blacks over the phone and had smiled after a response he had gotten on the call. Naomi was more keen on getting to the end of this after listening to her father. She needed rest first. Once done, she would find her way of making him get punished for his actions. Laid on her bed, Naomi had shed tears, recollecting the words that had been said to her. She had fallen asleep doing just that. Alex had woken up the next morning, unsure of what to do. The gardening materials hadn't been gotten from yesterday. A little anxiety had crept in, along with a fear of not meeting up with a scenario that could send him to the station again after yesterday. He spent the day disoriented and unorganized, unsure of his safety. This happened the next couple of days for him too. Understanding each other's perspective. Naomi had spent the past 3 days inside, calling off work after the incident. She had thought hard of what would have happened if the man hadn't stepped in. Would Mr. George have injured her or smashed her phone? Would she have been able to call the police soon enough for them to get the footage that served as proof? All the questions had one answer. Alex hadn't been guilty, but he was white. A white man had committed the atrocity that had sent her into a depressed mood. They had committed more crimes against her since she was a kid, but she had to be better than them. Her grandma had arrived, and she had explained what had happened to her. She had gotten a hug for her experience with lots of encouraging words, but she had also gotten a rebuke for acting like that to the man who saved her. Her grandma had made her realize she was much more trained in being good to others, and she could have just done that. She ended up with the decision to call Alex to thank him. Her grandma had supported her, commending her for a good decision. 3 days had passed fast, and Alex had still remained shocked by the last incident. Just finished carrying out his usual activities, a call came in. It was an unknown number he had picked up even still. He had heard the familiar voice of the woman he had saved, but had turned otherwise. She was the reason he had kept to himself for 3 days. Alex was a little angry at the situation, but he still wanted to hear what she had to say. Naomi had apologized on the phone, thanking him for saving her silence with Mr. George, who has shown he is capable of doing anything. Alex had accepted the apology and appreciation, but he was still unsure of what to say next. Naomi had briefed him, letting him know Mr. George might be released since his statement had been different from theirs. She let him know it was more than important to let Mr. George get punished for his act. Alex had agreed with her submission. He knew they needed a plan to fight the old man who had decided that he would make lives miserable for people who were of a different color or race. Naomi had been relieved to hear Alex mention his support for her. She had to plan. They had delegated what responsibility fell all on each and everyone, and now the goal was finally to ensure Mr. George didn't go unpunished. They both set up a meeting to discuss their plan. Now settled, Naomi had resumed work. She had briefed her assistant on what had happened, asking her to ensure she reported any cases of racism or sexism in the company. Earlier the day, her grandma had put their neighbor in his place after he had thrown sexist comments at her. Naomi had been happy to see someone come to her defense, saving her from the torture the impact of the old man's words would have on her. Alex and Naomi, collaborating together to fight against racism and sexism. Naomi was doing well until she received a call from Officer Johnson stating that Mr. George wanted to meet with her. Yes, Naomi had submitted the case for a potential trial if the investigation wasn't clear yet. She had excused herself from work to go to the police station to meet with them. As Naomi arrived at the police station, she was greeted by Mr. George's lawyers, who looked confident but nervous. The officer briefed them on the agreement. Mr. George would pay damages for the emotional distress he had caused and revamp his store's policies to prevent future incidents. Naomi accepted, knowing it was a step towards justice. After the meeting, Naomi had received a call from Alex mentioning how they couldn't let Mr. George off that easily. Naomi had agreed. She was ready to let it go, but remembering Mr. George had smirked after she had agreed to the condition and made it known that he would repeat the action. Working with Alex was the best way to get rid of his sly smirks. Alex and Naomi's next move was to monitor Mr. George's activities after his release. They started tracking his movements and meetings. It was Alex who discovered the trail of cryptic messages and coded emails, leading them to a bar on the outskirts of town. They had watched from a distance as Mr. George slipped in, his face covered by a hoodie. A few minutes later, a group of men with tattoos and scowls had followed him in, which had seen Naomi and Alex exchange a knowing glance. This was it. They soon discovered from their conversations that he was secretly meeting with a local hate group. Their next move was to find the hate group's online forums, gathering evidence of Mr. George's involvement. They worked tirelessly, documenting every post, every message, and every meeting to expose him. Tired, both Naomi and Alex had agreed they would continue at the next meeting, each of them finding their way home. Naomi had to work this time too. Alex updated her constantly before the next meeting was held. Naomi's assistant had taken up the task she had been given. She reported the string of incidents within the company, racist slurs, sexist comments, and subtle but clear biases. Naomi ensured she tackled each case head-on, ensuring the perpetrators faced consequences. She called them out in meetings with her words and asked the Human Resource Department to work on giving each case a befitting punishment that could include dismissal. Doing that had given Naomi relief and bounced back her courage. She was doing it, fighting her fears, and getting back the power she had given to the words that had been said to her. Naomi was finally fighting. As she left the office, Naomi's grandma was waiting at home, a warm smile on her face. "I'm so proud of you, Naomi," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "I know how hard it is to fight for what's right." And with that, she shared stories of her own struggles, of marches and protests, of facing down hatred and bigotry. Naomi felt a surge of inspiration, knowing she wasn't alone in this fight. Her parents had been turned to more of conforming to the norm, but her grandma had encouraged her to fight. She was happy to have her on her side. She had made it easy for her parents to have another look at her actions. Naomi had contacted Alex for them to meet up again. She knew there was going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Naomi and Alex finished with their investigation, prepared to take their evidence to the authorities when they received a call from an anonymous source within the hate group. "Meet us at the old warehouse at midnight. We'll give you proof of Mr. George's involvement," the text had read. Naomi and Alex exchanged a cautious glance. This could be their chance to bring Mr. George to justice once and for all, but they knew they had to be careful. As Alex worked alongside Naomi, he couldn't help but feel a spark ignite within him. For years, he had dedicated himself to the military, following orders and completing missions with precision. But after leaving the service, he felt lost, unsure of what to do with himself. The sense of purpose he once had seemed to fade away, leaving him feeling aimless. But collaborating with Naomi on this case was different. For Alex, this collaboration was more than just a case. It was a chance to rediscover himself, to find a new sense of direction. And as he stood alongside Naomi, ready to face whatever lay ahead, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Naomi and Alex arrived at the old warehouse, their hearts racing with anticipation and a sense of shared purpose. Despite their differences, they had formed a strong bond, united by their quest for justice and their determination to expose the truth. Naomi's unwavering dedication and resilience had driven the investigation forward, while Alex's unshakable support and belief in her had helped her overcome her doubts and fears. A figure emerged from the shadows. Her eyes looked nervously around the warehouse. She approached Naomi and Alex, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you the ones who want to take down Mr. George?" Naomi nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. "Yes, we are. We have evidence of his hate crimes, but we need more to build a strong case." The young woman, who looked no more than 20 years old, hesitated for a moment before handing them a folder. "I've been following your work. I know what you're trying to do. I want to help." Naomi took the folder, her eyes scanning the contents. It was one filled with a lot of evidence, records of Mr. George's transactions with the hate group, meetings, payments, and more. "Who are you?" Alex asked, his voice gentle yet curious about why the woman had wanted to help and how she had gotten to know them. The young woman took a deep breath before answering. "My name is Sarah. I used to be a member of the hate group. I was young and stupid, and I didn't know any better. But when I saw the harm we were causing, I knew I had to get out. I've been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for someone to trust." Naomi's heart went out to Sarah. She knew how hard it was to leave a toxic group, to go against everything you thought you believed in. "Thank you, Sarah," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This evidence will be invaluable in our case against Mr. George." Sarah nodded, a small smile on her face. "I'm just glad I can make a difference. I want to help bring him down, to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." As Sarah turned to leave, Naomi called out to her, "Wait, Sarah. How can we protect you? You're taking a huge risk by coming forward." Sarah turned back, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm willing to take that risk. I want to make a difference, but if you could keep my name out of it, I'd appreciate it. I don't want to put my family in danger." Naomi nodded, her mind racing with ways to protect Sarah's identity. She knew that they had to be careful, that Mr. George and his followers would stop at nothing to silence them. But with Sarah's evidence, they finally had a chance to bring him down. As they received the folder containing evidence of Mr. George's heinous hate crimes, Naomi's eyes met Alex's, and they shared a moment of triumph and vindication. In that instant, they felt like an unstoppable team, a united front against hatred, bigotry, and injustice. Their differences in skin color and background seemed irrelevant. They were fighting for a common cause, a shared humanity. With the folder's contents in hand, Naomi and Alex submitted the evidence to the authorities, their hearts filled with a sense of purpose, justice, and moral obligation. They had kept Sarah's name as an anonymous person who had reached out with no traces. The wheels of the legal system began to turn, and soon Mr. George was facing prosecution for his despicable crimes. As the trial unfolded, Naomi and Alex's evidence proved instrumental in securing a conviction. Mr. George's empire crumbled, his influence dimmed, and his legacy tarnished by the truth about his actions. It was finally over. Naomi reflects on her journey. She realizes that she's learned to embrace her identity and find strength in her voice. She's come to understand that her experiences, though unique, are not isolated, and that her story can be a catalyst for change. She was now courageous, bold enough to face her fears and fight for justice. Naomi's parents, though well-intentioned, struggled to understand her determination to expose the truth. They feared for her safety and reputation, but Naomi knew she had to stand up for what was right. She was grateful for her grandmother, who was a constant source of support and encouragement. She had always told Naomi that her voice mattered, that her story was important, and that she had the power to create change. Her wisdom and guidance helped Naomi stay grounded and focused on her goals. Naomi felt a sense of closure wash over her, knowing that justice had been served and that she had played a crucial role in bringing a perpetrator to account. She had confronted her own vulnerabilities and fears and had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined. As they stood outside the courtroom, Naomi turned to Alex with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for saving me from Mr. George's evil clutches and for believing in me." Alex's face softened, and his eyes filled with warmth and admiration. "You're welcome, Naomi. We make an unbeatable team, and I'm honored to call you my friend and ally." Reflections and lessons learned. Naomi smiled, feeling a sense of peace, closure, and new beginnings wash over her. "I'm honored to call you my friend too, Alex. You've helped me find my strength, my voice, and my purpose. I'll always be grateful for that." They both exchanged a hug. Exchanging a hug with Naomi, Alex looks back on his journey and realizes that leaving the military was only the beginning of his search for his hidden passion. His military training and experience had prepared him for combat, but he never thought he'd be using those skills to support a stranger-turned-friend in her time of need. Yet, that's exactly what happened. Alex had used his training to help Naomi, and in doing so, he realized that his skills could be used for so much more than just fighting. He could use them to create positive change. For the first time in his life, Alex feels like he's making a real difference. He's not just following orders or completing missions. He's fighting for something he believes in. He's proud to be using his skills to make a difference, and he knows that no matter what comes next, he's ready. His motivation was back. He wouldn't ever stop saving people. He's found his new mission, his new purpose, and he's excited to see where it takes him. As they parted ways, Naomi and Alex knew their journey was far from over. They had sparked a movement, inspiring others to take action against racism and inequality. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but they were ready to face it both individually and together, armed with the courage to listen, learn, and grow. As we conclude Naomi and Alex's story, we're reminded that we all have the power to create positive change. Their unlikely friendship shows us that different individuals can become powerful forces for good. We're inspired to take action, using our unique skills to drive change and create a more just society. Change starts with us, listening, learning, growing, and challenging our biases and assumptions. Naomi and Alex's journey demonstrates the impact of collective action against injustice. Let's draw inspiration from their story, build bridges, and fight for justice. Let's move forward together and create a world where everyone can thrive.